Hey YouTube, it's me Shane again with another gear video. Today I'm gonna do a couple videos of my two Ceriatone amps. I'm not sure if it's Ceriatone, Ceriatone. Regardless, I'm going to show you my first one, which is a 36 RP. That's a 36 watt clone of an 18 watt Marshall with twice the power. So first I'll show it to you, and I'll describe it, my relationship with Ceriatone, and then we'll do a little bit of playing. So let's flip this around. Get started. So it came without a cabinet, so I put it in a small box plexi head case, and so I call it my Marsenal. So first of all, the front panel is pretty self-explanatory. It's two channels. I usually jump the two channels with one of these little cables. For a while I was running it. It has no effects loop, so I was running it with a rack mounted reverb unit. So I was taking, these are parallel inputs, so I was taking an out from this input, going to the reverb unit, and then coming back into this second channel. And that gives you the opportunity to, adjust the tone and the level of the reverb. So yeah, again, no effects loops, everything, and these things take pedals so well. So first, let's take a walk through the amp. So the rear panel, as I said, it's a 36 watt with a half power switch. It takes 3 12AX7s, 4 EL84s. It's got a lay down power transformer, a stand up normal output transformer, and a choke. This came with a tube rectifier, a GZ34. But one time we were doing a sound check at a festival and it had fallen off the truck, and so it shorted or wrecked the rectifier tube. So I went to a store in that city and they had no tubes, but I bought a solid state rectifier. Not sure if that's a good idea or not. It isn't with the second amp that I'm going to show you, but so it's got switchable negative feedback. I believe this switch is upside down because when I did damage it, I took it apart and I think I put the switch in upside down. Regardless, negative feedback on or off, and that makes it a little more saggy when it's off, and when it's on you get a little bit more snap and a little bit more clean headroom, essentially. It's got 3 outputs, one at a time, 16 ohm, 8 ohm, and 4 ohm. Slow blow fuse, mains. I asked Nick if he could actually make me a little card with it, with the people who worked on it, signature and a couple of words for me, which they were gracious enough to do, so I appreciate that, Nick. And so yeah, I'll do some more descriptions. So the reason that I got into Ceriatone in the first place was my bass player gave me, I'll turn this around, bass player gave me an old Harmony combo that he had, an H415. It's actually in the Marshall Bible. They mention that amp because it's a pretty awesome Marshall 18 watt essentially. So he gave me that amp because he knew I was a tube guy, and I think he assumed that it wasn't working. So he gave it to me essentially just for the tubes. So I brought it home and fired it up, and I was shocked. I've always been a Marshall player, 100 watters usually, and so it's so hard to, get the Marshalls to sound awesome at reasonable levels, volumes. So when I first plugged into that Harmony 18 watt, I was like, wow, this is the greatest sounding amp I've had in a long time. And it wasn't overly loud. It pretty much sounded nice and crunchy, kind of AC/DC tones. Oddly, there was one of the EL84s missing, so it shouldn't have really worked, but I put a new EL84 in it and loved it, brought it to the first gig, and I was having a problem. It just didn't quite have enough clean headroom. We did some country and some rock, and so, I needed clean with some headroom, and it wasn't quite cutting it. So at about the same time, I had a Marshall small 50 watt 1987X. That's their reissue of the of the plexi 50 watt plexi, and it was great, but it was loud. But so I wanted to actually take the printed circuit board out and replace it with they call it a point to point, which isn't the right word, but I wanted to replace it with a point to point board. So I started going online, seeing where I could buy one, and I found Metropolis, and I can't remember the price of a board for a 1987X. I can't remember at all. But so after that, I never did order one. I wound up selling that amp, but I had built a couple of pedals and I wanted to get into building my own amp. And so I went back to Metropolis website, who sold kits, DIY kits, and it was going to be like $1,000 for a 50 watt Marshall clone kit. So I'm not sure how I found Ceriatone, but I did, and the price for the same kit to build my own 50 watt Marshall was around like $599 Canadian dollars. Don't quote me on any of that. This was in 2005 or 2006. I got the amp in early 2006. So it was going to be $600 to get a kit for me to build my own amp, my first build. But after looking at the site a little more, I discovered that it was going to be like $60 more to have them build it for me. And as badly as I wanted to get into building amps, I thought I'd be smarter to get the pros to build it, because they're obviously going to do a better job than I would have. And I'm glad I did. But so I emailed the Ceriatone, and Nik, the owner himself, replied like the same or the next day, which was kind of shocking in itself. I told him the story about the 18 watt Harmony amp that I had, and asked him if he would be able to build me essentially the same amp but with a little more clean headroom. So he told me that he would go looking around the internet to try to find a schematic of that amp and see how he could improve it and give me more clean headroom. So he replied, said he found it, and he said, with a little bit sturdier or more powerful transformers, he could build me essentially the same amp, but with more clean headroom. But he then recommended or suggested or told me to think about maybe getting a 36 watt, which would obviously give me more clean headroom. But it would be pretty loud. The difference between 36 watts and 50 watts for volume is pretty much non-existent. A 36 watt is just about as loud as a 50 watt, so you're not going to really hear the difference. So I asked him if he could build me one with a half power switch, and he looked it up and decided that he would, essentially, I gotta quit using that word, he could build me a switchable half power switch, and he could kind of copy the circuit from a matchless DC30, which had a half power switch. He asked me exactly what tones I was hearing in my head, what I wanted, what I was looking for. Told him that I was a Marshall guy, I liked the Marshall crunch, I hated the volume. At the time I was using a 76 Marshall 100 JMP master model, so it had a master volume. And I had an AB box, and I had an old Fender twin reverb, a 1970 twin reverb, so I was using the twin for my cleans and the AB box, switching to the Marshall for my dirt crunchy, and I was using pedals. So I told him that, I was looking for a quieter plexi tone, but I also wanted some clean Fender tones. So I asked him how he could help me. So he got back to me a couple days later and said that how about, he gave me a few options. One was like pretty much a Fender power section with a Trainwreck preamp, and I wasn't familiar with Trainwreck at all. But we settled on the 36 RP, and RP stands for Richie Plexi, who's the guy that designed that this amp. So yeah, I asked him about the half power switch. He said no problem, and so he got to building it, and he spent like a couple weeks on the bench himself, the owner of the company, building the amp. When he was finished and ready to ship it, he said that he had gone through some different versions of it, but he said that he would include all the components that he had swapped from the original schematic, so that in case in the future I wanted to change things or go back to a little bit more of the original amp, that I could use those parts, which I just thought was another awesome thing for Nik, the actual owner of the company, to offer. And I was so impressed that he took so much time trying to build exactly what I wanted for me, to get me the tones, not the voices I was hearing in my head. So it arrived. I was pleased, very pleased. There was a little bit too much bottom end, even with a little bit too much bass, even with the bass pot turned all the way down. So I asked him, how could I fix that? How could I get a little bit less bass out of it? Excuse me. So he told me that I could swap, I think it was a .022 microfarad, and it came with Mallory 150 capacitors, tone capacitors, and I could switch the capacitor that was on the middle pot to either a .01 or a .022 from a .022 or a .01. I can't remember which one, but I had heard a lot about mustard caps. So when I went online shopping for a .022 or a .01 mustard Mullard 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 mustard capacitor, I discovered that it was, going to cost me like probably $10 more to get a handful of them rather than just one. So then I decided maybe I'll switch all the caps in the amp to mustards. So I ordered all the mustards for it, and a lot of them were more than one. So that's when I actually sell mustard capacitors online, and that was what got me started on that. So yeah, I also had a high watt DR504, a 50 watt. It was like a 1972 or 71 head. And if you've ever seen the insides of a high watt amp, Harry Joyce was the guy that made them originally, I think originally, and he was an old military guy, and so high watts were built, point to point military spec wiring. And military spec wiring is that every wire is colored and labeled, and they all have a 90-degree angle bent into them. And the reason they were made like that was, I think, originally in World War One, when they had their radios and stuff in the muddy trenches, and when they had to repair one, they didn't want to have to start opening a book and trying to find which component to change and which was what. So military spec wiring gave them, it gave them the ability to see really quickly which component needed to be changed, where it was connected. Anyway, high watt a gut shot, the inside of a high watt amp is so beautiful and so sexy, and the wiring is so perfect. And compared to when you look at an old Marshall, it seems like a spider's nest of just wires everywhere, and seems kind of messy. And same with old Fender amps and pretty much any amp. But when I looked inside the Ceriatone, it reminded me so much of the high watt. Everything was beautiful. It was like a work of art inside. So I was a little bit reluctant to start swapping the capacitors with my caveman soldering skills, but I did it, and it turned out really well. And whether it's placebo or not, whether different capacitors of the same value can actually change the tone, I don't know. Definitely to me, I definitely heard and felt the difference. It just seemed to be kind of the difference between leather and pleather, or plastic and leather. The amp sounded great originally, but compared to when I put the mustards in it, and again, this could just, it might not be real, I might just be dreaming it. It just seemed to be warmer sounding with, nicer mids. And it was kind of like, I equated it to, if you've ever listened to the outtakes, the Aussie, with um uh, now I can't remember his name. How can I not remember his name? Outtakes of D, and you could hear Randy Rhoads in the studio, and he was smoking a cigarette, and you could hear him every time he took a puff. You could hear him inhale. That was kind of the difference that I felt when I put the mustard caps into the Ceriatone. I was playing a Strat at the time, and it almost seemed like everything was more clear, and it was essentially like you could hear the guitar's tongue in its mouth, the way you could hear Randy's tongue in him puffing on the cigarette in the studio. Um, Again, whether the difference is real or I was just dreaming it, I don't know. But again, it's kind of, might have been more of a feel thing. And if you feel better playing your amp, you're going to play better. Anyway, so I swapped all the caps and put mustards in it, and it all worked fine. And I figured it sounded better. And pretty much every time I've got off the stage after gigging with this amp, I've been approached by dudes asking me, "Is that a real plexi? Is that an original plexi? Is that an old Marshall plexi, a real plexi?" Because it sounds so incredible, and I was like, thanks, I appreciate the compliments, but no, it's a Ceriatone, and you should really. I mean, it's a boutique amp at prices less than just a store-bought, mass-produced Marshall. You're getting a hand-built. Originally, also, I said to Nik, I'm like, why don't you move your factory? Because I know that a lot of Westerners, when they hear made in China, we get a little bit of a bad taste in our mouth. And he was seemed to be a little bit offended by that. And he's like, my shop isn't in China. I think he said he had considered opening it in China because labor was so much cheaper. But he, said how the labor force in China was pretty much untrained, unskilled. But in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, where he lived and where he opened his shop, the workforce is highly trained. He explained how, all your processors for all your computers, Motorola, they're all made in Malaysia because the workforce is so highly skilled. And he was like, I don't have a bunch of garage builders working for me. I've got actual educated electronics engineers pretty much working in my shop. So they're not made in China. It's Malaysia. It's not even close to being like made in China. He was absolutely right about it being a top-notch, hand-built, beautiful work of art. So, yeah, so it's got a master volume. Even after changing the capacitor, I'm going to turn this back around. Even after changing the capacitor around to give me less bottom end. Why won't this turn? Oh, wrong button. After swapping out that capacitor, the bass was still a little bit overbearing. So even now, I still run it essentially with the bass on 0. Another thing that I didn't really like about Marshalls, I mean, I love everything about Marshalls, but it seemed like the middle, and the middle was pretty much another treble pot. The middle never sounds really midi. It sounds more high end, more trebly. With this though, you can crank the middle and it doesn't sound really bright. It's an actual middle. So he said, okay, channel 1 is going to be your Marshall-y voice pretty much, and channel 2 is going to be more like a Tweed Fender. So you could just got a different personality, potentially maybe a little brighter. And like I said, for a while I was running it with my reverb unit, so I was coming out of the second input to the reverb and then coming out of the reverb into the second channel. And now I just jumper the two channels like you do with them 4-input Marshall. Master volume, bass, mid, treble, volume, and channel 2, which also uses the master volume. So let's plug it in and see what happens, how it sounds. The half power switch, I'll try that. The NFB, the negative feedback, isn't going to really make a big noticeable difference. It's definitely different when you're gigging or when you're playing loud or when you're, really into it. But I don't know if you're really going to be able to hear much difference, especially on YouTube, the way they compress everything so much. So let's see if I can get this camera phone working properly and get everything in the frame. I think that's pretty good right there. All right. So again, I'm using my 2012-ish PRS Studio. I'm using this instead of my regular Les Paul because this gives you, the out of phase and the in-between tones that a Strat does, and it's just going to show more of what the amp can do. So I'm using, my guitar has a Seymour Duncan custom in the bridge position instead of the 5708. I found that the 5708 was just, the middle and neck pickups seemed overwhelming and louder than the bridge pickup. It has push-pull, so coil split for the bridge pickup. Again, I've got the bass on 0. We'll play with the treble, with the middle. Everything else pretty much is at 5 at noon. So no pedals. I'm just going straight in. So actually, we'll start. I'll show you the dirty sounds with the volume cranked and the master. It's nice and dirty, sounds pretty Marshall-y, and it cleans up so well. Alright, so back down to normal a little bit. Give some clean tones. So, again, the bass is on 0. Now check this out. On 5. Just got a lot of bottom end, and you might like that. I'm in a 3-piece band, and so I like the guitar to sit, in its frequency where it should. I don't want to be stepping on the toes of the bass tone, the bass guitar's sound. So I don't really use or need any bass. It doesn't need it. And the middle, I think, I'm not sure if Nick told me, if I just realized this on my own, but when you crank the middle all the way up, again, it's not a real trebly middle. It just gives it more of that Marshall personality. So this is the middle on 0 and the bass on 0. Now the middle's on about 5. It's not trebly, it's actually MIDI. Cranking the mid all the way up gives you a little bit more dirt, I think. So this is and this is a really loud amp on full power, and it gives you all the clean headroom you could ever want. I gig with this amp, whether it's in a small bar. This weekend we're playing a casino. I'll be using it. I've got a plexiglass baffle. This is a 112 empty combo cabinet with a Celestion G1265, an 80 or whatever year they came out in the JTM45s. They've reissued that speaker. I really like that speaker. It's pretty much a greenback that can handle more power. So the neck pickup, the middle pickup, YouTube, not much, you can't, it's hard to hear the actual, you know, fine parts. So this is the bridge and neck pickup with the bridge in humbucker mode. And the other middle, so between the neck and the middle pickup. And so back to the bridge pickup. Now I'll pull it for a single coil. Oops, not very well in tune, but I don't want to spend the time while you're watching. At home, the bass, it actually makes it a little warmer, and the bass isn't overbearing or overwhelming. But live, I just find no need for the bass. It stays on 0. So let's have a little more. It's just a beautiful sounding amp and guitar. So well, let's do some half power. Try the, hit the half power switch. And the half power switch is inside the cabinet. It's not, you know, so you have to actually, I've got the back with Velcro so I can access the half power switch easily. Should probably have it in standby when you switch the power. You know what? That was actually in half power. It wasn't in full power. So now it's in full power. So you might have heard how loud it is even just in 18 watt mode. Let's try the dirty mode. You're never going to want more volume than this out of an amp. At least I sure don't. So back to, this is in full power. Sorry about that. It was in half power originally. I assumed it was in full power because it's so damn loud. Do a little bit of the negative feedback switch. Again, I don't know if you're going to be able to hear the difference. I'm going to put it in standby for that too. So I'm pretty sure it's had the negative feedback in the off position. Now it's going to be on. And again, I don't know if you're going to be able to really tell the difference. Standby. It just seems a little bit more soft with the negative feedback out. Again, it could be making. I'm not an amp builder, and so I don't really know the terminology or exactly what's going on. I always leave the negative feedback off. All right, let's try the Fender channel. Turn it down a little bit. Since the pandemic, we haven't been doing a lot of gigs, so this thing has actually been in the basement for quite a while. I've been using a Fender Hot Rod DeVille 3 for the outdoor gigs this summer, just because it's easier to haul just a single unit instead of a cabinet and a head and the cables. But definitely this weekend at the casino and rehearsal, it's going to be the Ceriatones probably this red one is a C-Rec. It's the clone of the Z-Rec. I'll talk about that more when I do the video of the C-Rec, but I wound up getting this because for a while I also had a Z Maz Junior, an 18 watt 112 Dr. Z amp. It was the reverb unit, has reverb, and I can't remember what I got it in a trade. I think they're to buy one up here. It's like $1,800, at least it was then. And this cost me, again, like $659 to be built by Nik. So one day I decided to kind of A/B the Maz, the Z with these 36 RP, and even in 18 watt mode, Z makes great amps, and you know, they're handmade, point to point, blah blah blah. To me, they're overpriced, probably even more so now, and not really a boutique amp per se. But I was just shocked how this thing did everything that the Maz did, but it did it better, and it did so much more except reverb. So, you know, a couple of years ago, I think probably in 2015, I spoke to Nik and told him the Z story and asked him if he could, what he suggested for a Z-ish amp. And he said, hey, I'll build you a C-Rec, which is a clone of the Z-Rec, and that's what Brad Paisley plays, the country amazing guitar player. Anyways, so this is the Fender-y voiced channel. We'll go back to this one and I'll show you, we'll walk through the treble. I'll show you compared to the middle and stuff. Sorry about that. Definitely a little bit brighter and not louder, but just more Fender-y than the Marshall channel. You can't make a bad tone with this amp, no matter what you do. Oh, and yeah, touch sensitivity. It goes from clean to scream just with the guitar volume or how hard you play it, and so every time I play this thing, I'm just smiling, and I love it so much. So I'm going to go back to the first channel, the Marshall channel, and we'll play with the tone stack a little bit, and then I'm going to jump the channels, and then we'll be done. Then we'll do a video of the C-Rec. I usually run it when I'm playing on the edge of breakup, so usually, as far as I can remember, both the master and the volume are probably at around 3, not 3 o'clock, but the number 3 on the dial, and that gives me just a little bit of breakup and allows me to clean it up with headroom and crispy, clean, punchy headroom. And if I hammer on it, it gives some overdrive, and it loves pedals. So right now the middle is on about half, about noon. Bass is on 0. Here's the bass at 5. It's amazing with just a 112 how loud and how great it sounds. But the bass is a little much. So as I was mentioning, how with Marshalls I find the middle to pretty much be another treble knot pot or presence even. It's not like another treble pot on this amp. Alright, so the treble. Everything is usable and everything sounds great. Just like the DeVille that I have, the Hot Rod DeVille, the new line, the 4? Whatever the latest DeVille 212 is, the way they used to be, like Marshalls, goes from 0 to 100 between 1 and 2. So this doesn't do that. It's everything, all the pots work the way you want them to. They're not overwhelming and cranked as soon as you touch them. The middle is middle, the treble is treble, the bass is too much. Yeah, I just love this thing so much. Alright, now we'll jump the channels. Which, I don't know, I just find it to be more of everything. Or less if you want, you know, you don't have to have that channel turned on. So this is just the Marshall channel. Just seems to fill it out more. Whatever a Fender has that a Marshall doesn't, gives you that, just makes the whole thing more of a complete. You can feel the the crunch come in when you add the Marshall channel, and I should call it the first channel, and with I forgot to show you how the master works for the second channel also. Can't wait till tonight at rehearsal, and I can't wait till the weekend at the gig. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share my video. And don't forget to come back and check out the Ceriatone C-Rec. I'm going to be making that video right away as soon as I get this one downloading or uploading to the site. Thanks again. Come back, and don't forget to, you got to get yourself a Ceriatone. It's a great feeling. Nik really listens to what you want, listens to what you don't want. He replies right away. He's a great guy. You just feel like a member of a family when you're dealing with Nik. Like I said, he really listens, bends over backwards to give you what you want, and he's always succeeded with me. So you're in good hands with Nik. Yeah. Thanks again for watching, and hope to see you again real soon. Thanks.